The living room was a soft sea of color, cardboard animals smiling up from the rug, a jungle half assembled around a single missing neck. Lillian guided the giraffe piece toward the space in Leo's puzzle, her fingers steady, the boy's breath hitching in his small chest. "Easy," she murmured, that voice she saved for scraped knees and stubborn corners. The tab slipped into place with a satisfying click. Leo grinned, and she grinned back, and for a beat, the world was only cardboard and triumph. Then a voice, cool and precise as a scalpel. "I need to speak with you, alone." Oliver Blackwell stood at the doorway, framed by the hall's pale light, every line on him pressed and certain, the kind of man who ironed the air by walking into it. Lillian's shoulders tightened, but she kept her smile for Leo. "1 second, buddy." She kissed the top of his head and stood, the floor cool under her bare feet. In the hall, the air smelled faintly of lemon and something metallic, money or restraint. "Is something wrong with Leo?" she asked, already braced. "No." He adjusted his cufflink without looking at it. "It's about tonight. You're coming with me to the company gala." She blinked. What?" "You'll ride with me. Wear something appropriate." His tone turned orders into furniture. The sentence arrived already placed where he wanted it. "I was hired as a nanny," she said evenly, "not as a decorative +1. "Tonight you'll be both," he replied, as if he were pointing out the weather. "The person who was supposed to go canceled. I need someone. You're here. I'm not a chair you pull up to a table because someone else forgot to come." He took in a breath, the faintest flare of patience. "I've arranged care for Leo. A sitter is confirmed. A stylist will arrive at 7 with options. A car at 8. It's all handled." "There's nothing wrong with my hair," she said, and not because she believed it was the point. "What's already nice can be even better," he said, almost gentle, like an apology that had been sanded until it didn't risk cutting him. She folded her arms, meeting him halfway down his height with posture alone. "It isn't in the contract. It is now." He turned to leave, the conversation tidily filed, and she followed 2 steps, heat rising bright behind her ribs. "You think you can summon people, Mr. Blackwell, but you forgot a crucial step. Ask." He paused. He didn't turn fully. "Will you come to the gala with me this evening?" His voice didn't change. The question mark felt like a temporary visitor. She held his gaze until the silence had its say. "I'll go," she said finally. "But I don't belong to your optics. I'm not a memo you can revise." A shadow of a nod. "Be ready by 8. Don't be late." He left her with the echo of her own heartbeat, and when she returned to the living room, Leo was watching her with that solemn concentration reserved for adults on thin ice. "You're going out with Dad?" "Looks like it," she said, crouching beside him. She slid the giraffe puzzle piece back out, studied its printed eyes, then tucked it into the pocket of her cardigan. "I'm borrowing this, for luck." "Bring the dinosaur next time," he whispered, conspiratorial. She tapped his nose. "Deal." At 7:05 sharp, a knock. The woman who entered was small and fast, like a sparrow who'd learned to push luggage carts. Grace, according to her laugh. "Miss Lillian, we are on a mission. Red carpets have been warned." "Raw material," Lillian said, one brow at half-mast when Grace declared it. "In the best way," Grace answered, already unfurling a rack of dresses, fabric sliding like soft rivers over chrome. The next 40 minutes passed in a rhythm of pins and powder, brushes kissing her eyelids, a lift of hair that didn't erase the person under it. Grace kept asking, "You?" And Lillian kept saying, "Simple." And together they agreed on a dress that was both, red that glowed rather than shouted, a quiet line that understood her waist, a neckline that trusted her shoulders. She looked in the mirror and found not a stranger, not a fantasy, but a version of herself she hadn't admitted still lived there. She breathed. The room changed temperature. "At 8, Grace said, snapping her kit shut. "You will not apologize for existing." Lillian laughed. "I wasn't planning to." Downstairs, the house listened to its own silence. She stepped onto the landing, hand gliding over the banister, and took the stairs as if the floor might disagree. Oliver stood in the foyer, adjusting his tie like he was negotiating with it. He turned, and for a second the famously controlled expression dropped, a micro flinch, a skipped frame. He put the mask back on so quickly she could have imagined it. "You look acceptable," he said, and it would have been insulting if his voice hadn't caught on the second syllable. She tilted her head, a smile spreading well beyond politeness. "Not too bad for someone you hired to wipe glue off the coffee table." He offered his arm. She considered it, then took it, ownership sitting quietly in the way her fingers didn't cling. "I'm going for me," she said. "Not for the photo. As long as you don't spill wine on anyone, your reasons are your own." They crossed the threshold, and cool evening air slid over her bare shoulders. At the curb, the town car's door waited like a mouth about to speak. As the driver rounded the hood, Oliver said, almost as an afterthought, "Meredith will be there." "She the one with the pearls in your history?" Lillian kept her tone light. "Is part of the company's past," he said, which sounded exactly like the kind of phrase you'd use when you wanted the past to stay properly archived. "Your company seems very fond of appearances," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Appearances pay for a lot of realities," he answered. "And hide a lot of them," she said, then slipped into the car before he could decide whether to agree. Leather and hush inside. The city's lights scanned across the window like quiet applause, then fell away as the hotel's facade grew. Golden and mirrored, a cathedral built for deals. Lillian slid a hand into her pocket and touched the puzzle piece, the paper edges small and certain. She thought of Leo's careful hands, of the shape that needed her to fit correctly, and she held the piece like a promise. She would not vanish into somebody else's picture. The car rolled to its stop. "Ready?" Oliver asked. And for the first time tonight, there was no order in it, only a man with a door he could not open for her. "Always," she said and meant it. The handle clicked, night air, camera breath. The door swung wide and sound swelled, the bright noise of cutlery and laughter spilling from the hotel, the staccato thrum of shutters sinking to heartbeat. She set one heel on the carpet, then the other, red pouring around her like a kept secret finally choosing daylight. Conversations hiccuped and stalled, heads turned in a small, precise wave. Somewhere a woman in pearls, Meredith, she guessed by the temperature, lowered her glass without sipping. Flashbulbs stitched white across Lillian's vision. A murmur skated the surface of the crowd and gathered into a question with teeth. "Who is she?" The chandeliers glittered like captured stars, and the room hummed with the careful laughter of people who measured worth in contracts and champagne. Oliver Blackwell walked in first, tall and sharp in his midnight suit, but it wasn't his presence that stole the air. At his side, Lillian in red moved like a secret unwrapped too suddenly. The fabric clung and swayed as if even gravity wanted a better look. Conversations hiccuped. Forks froze midair. For a suspended second, the ballroom forgot its script. Oliver felt the eyes. He was used to them. But tonight, something was different. They weren't watching him. They were watching her. Lillian felt it too, the subtle shift in temperature, the way whispers darted from lip to ear. She straightened her shoulders, met the glances, and smiled just enough to signal she wasn't prey. She didn't cling to Oliver's arm. She walked beside him like someone who knew her place because she'd carved it herself. The first to intercept them was Meredith Kensington, pearls draped like trophies, lips curved in the practiced smile of someone who could slice a rival open without lifting her voice. "Oliver," she said smoothly, "you brought company. How refreshing." Her gaze slid to Lillian, lingered on the red dress. Bold color, very noticeable. Lillian extended her hand before Oliver could open his mouth. "Lillian Cruz, pleased to meet you." Her tone was polite, her eyes unflinching. Meredith shook with two fingers as if holding something fragile. "And do you work with Blackwell Holdings?" "Something like that," Lillian said, the faintest smile tugging her lips. "Interesting," Meredith murmured, then pivoted to the men flanking her. "The company has been adopting such creative inclusion policies lately." The jab landed like perfume, sweet, poisonous. Lillian tilted her head, still smiling. "I admire women who can wear three-lay airs of satin and glide without tripping. That's a real skill." The remark shimmered between compliment and critique, leaving Meredith blinking, unsure whether to be flattered or insulted. Oliver glanced at Lillian, surprise flickering through the cracks of his composure. They moved on, but the eyes followed. Investors whispered, their curiosity sharpening. At the main table, Oliver leaned toward Lillian and muttered under his breath, "Are you all right?" "I'm great," she said lightly, unfolding her napkin. "You should try smiling more. Makes you look less like you're in pain." His brow arched. "You do know you're talking to the president of the company? And you do know I'm not afraid of presidents, right?" Her voice held no malice, only the audacity of someone who had spent too long bowing to anyone. This time, the corner of his mouth twitched toward something dangerously close to a smile. Dinner unfolded in measured courses, every toast calculated, every laugh rehearsed. Lillian played the part, but never surrendered herself to it. She laughed when she wanted, asked sharp questions that caught executives off guard, and made Beaumont, the French investor, lean forward in genuine interest. When he asked what she thought of Blackwell's sustainability initiatives, she answered without hesitation. Progress only matters if it includes people, not just profits. The words hung in the air, unexpected, unpolished, and utterly disarming. Oliver studied her, the weight of his own certainty loosening. She wasn't performing, she was simply being, and somehow that was more compelling than the hundreds of perfected acts around them. He realized with a sudden start that he'd miscalculated. He had brought her here as a placeholder, a solution for a canceled seat. But Lillian wasn't filling a space, she was redefining it. Across the room, Meredith watched with narrowed eyes, her smile stiffening as she sipped her wine. Already, she was planning. And as Lillian lifted her glass, the crystal trembling slightly in her hand, she felt the puzzle piece hidden in her purse, a silent reminder that she was not here to vanish into someone else's picture. She was here to rewrite it. The night was still young, but already the room buzzed with a single question, whispered behind manicured hands and raised brows. Who is she? The gala lights were still burning behind them when the elevator doors sealed shut, cutting away the velvet hum of the ballroom. The mirrored walls caught Oliver and Lillian in sharp reflections, but the air was strangely still, the kind of stillness that demanded confession. The car began to descend with its usual sleek precision until a sudden lurch jarred them both, throwing Lillian against the polished rail and forcing Oliver's hand out as if instinct had betrayed him. The elevator shuddered once, then stopped. Lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied to a softer, emergency glow. The hum of machinery disappeared. Silence closed in, thick as a held breath. "You've got to be kidding me," Lillian muttered, steadying herself. "My grand debut in corporate theater and I end up stuck in a box." Oliver pressed the emergency button, his jaw tightening as the intercom sputtered with static. No reply. He pressed again, harder this time, as though force could bend wires. Still nothing. He pulled out his phone, frowned at the blank screen. No signal. Lillian leaned back against the wall, folding her arms. "Perfect. My first night in heels since my sister's wedding, and the universe says sit tight." He glanced at her, irritation edged with something softer. "Maintenance will fix it soon." Soon could mean 10 minutes, or 3 hours. She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't look like the type who enjoys waiting." "I don't," he admitted, surprising himself. For a moment they stood in parallel silence. The walls reflected them as opposing halves, him in his black suit, rigid as a statue, her in the red dress, vivid against the steel, eyes alight with a defiance that didn't waver. She broke the quiet first. "You know, men like you are usually the villains in bedtime stories. Cold, commanding, a little terrifying." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "And what about women like you? They don't usually get invited to the palace unless they're carrying a tray." She shrugged lightly. "But I've never liked the old stories anyway." The lights buzzed faintly above them. Oliver, for once, didn't know what to say. His life was a series of measured responses, but here, under low light with nowhere to run, every script felt thin. Lillian let the silence stretch before she spoke again, softer now. "I wasn't always a nanny." He turned toward her, brow furrowing. "I had a scholarship," she said, her voice level, though a flicker of pain threaded through it. "Psychology. First in my family to go to university, but then my mother got sick and my sister was still little, so I traded lectures for night shifts. I traded research papers for grocery bills, and eventually," she gestured vaguely, "here I am, building puzzles with your son, trying to make ends meet." Oliver's chest tightened. He had spent his life climbing towers so high he could no longer see the ground. She had been carrying entire worlds on her back just to keep her family afloat. "You laugh about being stuck here," he said quietly, "but you talk about those choices like they were nothing." They weren't nothing. Her eyes met his, steady and bright. "But if I don't laugh, I cry, and crying doesn't fix elevators or pay bills." His lips parted, then closed again. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer him a map out of himself. For the first time in years, he let out a sound that wasn't controlled, a laugh, brief and rough. "What?" she asked, startled. "I used to think women like you only existed in movies, resilient, untouchable, sharp-tongued. And I used to think men like you only existed in tax reports," she shot back, cold, arrogant, soulless. The look he gave her should have been a glare. Instead, it softened, a rare honesty peeking through. "You're not entirely wrong." The elevator groaned suddenly, shuddering back to life. The hum returned, the lights steadied, and the floor numbers began to tick downward. Neither moved. They watched each other instead, caught in a strange suspension that felt more binding than the steel box around them. When the doors opened at the lobby, the world rushed back in, the sound of heels clicking across marble, the smell of cologne and champagne trailing from the ballroom doors. Oliver stepped forward, then paused, holding the door open. "After you," he said. Lillian walked out, head high, but her heart raced as though she'd left something behind in that elevator, because in the space between floors, she had seen something in Oliver Blackwell she wasn't supposed to see. Not the CEO, not the suit, but the man, and the realization left her unsettled. What she didn't know was that he felt the same. For the first time in years, Oliver was no longer sure who he was more afraid of, her or himself. The restaurant was all glass and gold, a place where every fork was polished until it reflected a face back at you, and every laugh had an echo of calculation. Oliver rarely enjoyed these investor dinners, but tonight the weight in his chest felt heavier than usual. He had brought Lillian into a world of mirrors and masks, and a part of him read if she would be torn apart by it, or worse, if she would hold a mirror up to him. At first, everything unfolded according to script. Toasts raised, plates cleared. Executives leaned in to trade promises under candlelight. Lillian sat beside him, poised, her red dress now muted in the amber glow, but her presence was still undeniable. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but when she did, the table leaned closer. A quiet remark about how children adapt to change sparked a conversation on resilience in emerging markets. A casual observation about neighborhood parks led to talk of urban renewal. Oliver's investors listened as though her words carried weight beyond her role, and in truth they did. Then Meredith made her move. She arrived late, shimmering in navy silk, pearls at her throat like tiny shackles. Her smile was cool and effortless, but her eyes gleamed with intent. She slid into the empty chair across from Oliver, close enough for her perfume to cut through the scent of roasted lamb and aged wine. "Darling," she said lightly, "what a surprise to see you out socially." Her gaze flicked to Lillian, and though her lips curved upward, her eyes narrowed. "And with such charming company." Oliver stiffened, but Lillian gave the faintest smile, a careful one, the kind that revealed nothing and promised nothing. Meredith toyed with her glass for a long beat. Then, as if the thought had just occurred to her, said loudly enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, "I must say, I admire your courage, Oliver, bringing your son's nanny to a table like this." The words dropped like shards of glass. The table hushed. A waiter froze mid-step, clutching a bottle of wine. Several investors shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between Oliver, Meredith, and Lillian. Lillian felt every gaze turn on her. For a heartbeat, the air thickened. She could almost hear her own pulse. She looked at Oliver, waiting, hoping, expecting some word, some gesture of defense. But Oliver, always decisive, always commanding, sat motionless, caught between shock and fear. His mouth opened, but no words came. His silence roared louder than anything Meredith had said. Something in Lillian's chest cracked, but she refused to let it show. She laid down her fork with deliberate grace, folded her napkin, and placed it on the table. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the silence. "I am Leo's nanny, and before that, I was a cashier, a waitress, a caregiver, a cleaner. I have worked jobs most people in this room wouldn't last an hour doing, and I was proud of every one of them, because no matter the title, I gave it my best." Her words struck the room like flint against stone. Some flinched, some looked down at their plates. A few, very few, nodded faintly. She stood. Her chair scraped against the marble floor, the sound sharp as a blade. "Thank you for reminding me where I came from," she added, her throat tight but her chin unbowed, "and especially for reminding me where I refused to stay." Then she walked away. No tears, no trembling, just the weight of her dignity filling the empty space behind her. The murmurs started before she even reached the door, but she didn't look back. Oliver sat frozen, his heart hammering. He wanted to move, to call her back, to undo his silence, but the moment had passed. His failure was carved into the marble as clearly as if someone had etched it with a knife. Meredith sipped her wine, her smile serene and cruel. Later, long after the dinner ended and the guests dispersed, Oliver sat alone in his office. Papers lay scattered on his desk, but he couldn't read a word. He replayed the scene over and over. Meredith's barb, Lillian's eyes searching his own frozen silence. Shame pressed on his chest, heavier than any financial loss he had ever taken. That was when he saw it, a folder left on the side table, its cover worn, its pages filled with neat handwriting and colored tabs. Project Portfolio, the label read, with the name Lillian Cruz scrawled in careful ink. He opened it. Inside were ideas, sketches of community centers, notes on tutoring programs for children, proposals for neighborhood redevelopment, charts for microloan systems to support single mothers. Some pages were years old, their corners softened with time. She had carried these dreams long before she ever carried his son's puzzles. Oliver turned each page slowly, his chest tightening with every detail. She wasn't just the nanny he had failed to defend. She was a visionary, someone who had seen more, lived more, fought harder than anyone in that dining room, and he had reduced her to silence. He leaned back in his chair, the folder still open in his hands, and for the first time in a long while, Oliver Blackwell felt the crushing weight of shame. Not because he had been attacked, but because when it mattered most, he had stood with the powerful instead of the brave. And somewhere across the city, Lillian was packing her things. A thank you letter for the HR staff, a note for Leo, filled with drawings and promises, and for Oliver, just a single line on a folded piece of paper. Thank you for believing, even if only for a little while. Morning did not arrive softly at Blackwell Holdings. It came with headlines. By 7 a.m., blogs had plastered the story across their front pages. Nanny at the helm, Blackwell's curious dinner guest. CEO silent as companion outs herself. From playroom to boardroom, the footage was grainy someone's phone recording from across the restaurant, but it captured everything. Meredith's poised attack, Lillian's defiant stand, Oliver's silence. In the boardroom, the directors were restless. Some feared reputational damage. Others whispered about Oliver's judgment, and all of them kept circling back to the same unspoken truth. The nanny had stolen the narrative. Oliver sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. He listened as the communications director proposed a strategy, issue a statement about valuing all employees, spin Lillian's presence as a gesture of diversity of perspective. It was neat, clinical, safe. But Oliver wasn't listening. His mind kept replaying the moment her eyes had locked onto his, pleading for just one word of support, and how he had given her none. Then he thought of the portfolio he had found. Pages of dreams, sketched with more clarity than half the company's projects. He realized the worst wasn't that Meredith had exposed Lillian. The worst was that he had allowed the room to believe she was less than what she was. When the meeting's voices swelled into argument, he stood. Enough. The word cracked like glass. Every face turned. We don't need spin, Oliver said, voice steady. We need truth. Miss Cruz is more than a caretaker. She's a strategist with vision. I've reviewed her work. She's drafted social impact models that, frankly, outperform what our own teams have been able to propose. And last night, she showed more courage than anyone in this room, including me. The silence that followed was dense, disbelieving. Finally, the CFO cleared his throat. Oliver, you're suggesting we formalize what exactly? A social impact division, Oliver answered. Independent budget protected from PR interference. I want her to lead it. Murmurs rippled, but Oliver didn't flinch. He knew he was risking ridicule, maybe even his seat, but he also knew he had never been more certain of anything. Across the city, in her small apartment, Lillian folded clothes into a worn suitcase. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt hollow. She had already written her goodbyes. Leo's note was the hardest, doodles of rockets and dinosaurs framing her promise that she'd never stop cheering for him. She told herself leaving was the only way to protect her dignity. But as she zipped the bag, a knock rattled the door. Oliver stood there, not immaculate this time, tie loosened, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man who had lost something he couldn't afford to. You really caught me off guard last night, he said. Welcome to the club, she replied, arms crossed. I should have defended you. You didn't. Her words were simple, flat. No, I froze. That's not an excuse. He opened the leather folder in his hands, the one she thought she had lost. I found this, your work. Your ideas. Lillian, this isn't just a nanny's notebook. This is the foundation of something that could change lives. She stiffened, torn between pride and fury. And what, you're here to offer me a promotion, a shiny apology with benefits? I'm here to ask you to lead something real. A division with your name on the door, your terms, your vision, independent budget, independent oversight, no more silence from me. Her heart lurched, but she masked it with steel. And if I say no, then I'll still respect you. But I'll have lost the only person who has made me see this company, this life differently. The room seemed smaller, charged. Lillian looked at him for a long time, her pulse hammering in her ears. My terms are ironclad, full autonomy, no PR puppetry. My team, my call. And if you ever stand silent while I'm under fire again, it ends. Immediately. Oliver nodded, without hesitation. Deal. For the first time since she had met him, Lillian saw no trace of control in his expression, only sincerity. She exhaled slowly, as if letting go of the air she'd been holding since the restaurant. By afternoon, word was out. Blackwell Holdings was launching a social impact division led by Lillian Cruz. Investors were skeptical, employees whispered, and Meredith, watching from her penthouse, nearly shattered a glass in her hand when the news scrolled across her phone. But in the neighborhoods that Blackwell had long ignored, hope stirred. Community leaders who had fought for scraps read her name in the press release and began to call each other. Teachers, single mothers, volunteers, people who had never cared about corporate strategy now cared deeply. And at the launch event 2 weeks later, in a modest community center decorated with paper flowers and hand-painted signs, Lillian stood at the podium. Oliver sat off to the side, uncharacteristically in the shadows, letting her command the room. She didn't start with statistics. She started with a story, her story. Nights spent waiting tables to pay for her mother's medicine, afternoons helping her sister with homework under a flickering light bulb, mornings holding down jobs that barely paid rent. "This isn't charity," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This is justice, this is opportunity, and we're starting right here with the people who have always been told to wait their turn. I'm here to say, your turn is now." The applause thundered, louder and more real than anything Oliver had ever heard in a boardroom. But even as the sound swelled, Lillian felt the tension under the surface. She knew Meredith wasn't finished. She knew the press wasn't done circling. She knew power never yielded quietly. Yet in that moment, standing beneath string lights and hand-painted banners, she also knew she had found something stronger than fear, a cause worth every battle ahead. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with whispers. By the third month of the Social Impact Division's work, headlines had turned admiring. Blackwell reinvents corporate responsibility. From Nanny to Visionary, the rise of Lillian Cruz. Oliver watched the change with quiet awe, but Meredith Kensington was watching too, and what she saw felt like theft. In her penthouse, a glass of wine untouched, she studied the files spread across her desk. Old addresses, job records, even half-finished college transcripts. Nothing damning, nothing illegal, just fragments of a life lived in survival mode. Meredith knew facts weren't always necessary. Doubt, if planted correctly, was enough to destroy. Her plan unfurled one evening at the Ritz ballroom. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner. Blackwell Holdings was days from announcing its largest social partnership to date, with international backers ready to sign. The room glowed with chandeliers, investors sipping champagne, cameras waiting for a polished soundbite. Lillian stood at the back, calm in a midnight blue gown, her notes in hand. She wasn't the kind of woman who chased attention, but tonight the spotlight was hers anyway. She would present the division's results. Children educated, mothers trained, neighborhoods transformed. It was her work, her voice. Oliver insisted she take center stage. But when the lights dimmed for the presentation, another image appeared on the screen. Not the polished deck she had prepared. A collage of grainy photos. Lillian in a waitress apron, behind a grocery counter, clutching her mother's arm outside a clinic. Meredith's voice, dripping with elegance, cut through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce you not to an executive, but to a woman who has, how shall we say, played dress-up with this company. A nanny, a dropout, a fraud parading as a leader." Gasps filled the room. Cameras swiveled. For a split second, Lillian froze. Her throat closed, her heart thundered. The humiliation was merciless. But then she remembered Leo's drawing, the puzzle piece in her pocket, and every mother she had promised to fight for. She stepped forward, steady, her voice cutting sharper than Meredith's. "Yes, that's me." The words echoed. "I've scrubbed floors. I've carried trays. I dropped out of college to care for my sick mother. I have been everything Meredith Kensington believes makes me unworthy. And yet," she lifted her chin, "here I am, building programs that change lives. Because your worth is not defined by your resume or by where you started, but by what you choose to do when the world counts you out." The silence that followed was electric. Then someone began to clap, then another, and soon the ballroom swelled with applause, not polite but fierce, rising like a tide. Meredith's smirk faltered. Oliver stood, eyes blazing. "For years we've called ourselves leaders, but Lillian Cruz showed us what leadership looks like. Courage, truth, and heart. And tonight, I will not stay silent." He walked across the stage, the room holding its breath. Lillian turned toward him, startled. He didn't stop until he was at her side, facing the crowd. This company's future isn't built on hiding the past. It's built on embracing people who dare to rise above it. And I will stake my name, my company, and my life on that truth. Then, In front of investors, cameras, and Meredith's stunned eyes, he knelt. A small blue box appeared in his hand. The crowd gasped again, this time in wonder. "Lillian Cruz," Oliver said, voice thick but steady. "You've already changed. Get my company. You've already changed my son. You've already changed me. Now I'm asking if you'll change the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The ballroom seemed suspended in time. Lillian's vision blurred with tears. She thought of her mother, her sister, Leo's laughter. She thought of every wall she had scaled, every humiliation endured. And now this man, once cold, once untouchable, was offering her not just a ring but a place beside him, equal, seen, unhidden. She laughed through the tears. "You're insane, Oliver Blackwell." "Absolutely," he whispered. "And still," she extended her hand trembling. "Yes." The applause this time shook the chandeliers. Investors rose to their feet. Cameras flashed like fireworks. And at the back of the room, Meredith watched her final weapon shatter in her hands. The narrative was no longer hers to control. Later, in the quiet of the car ride home, Leo sat between them, grinning from ear to ear. "So you're gonna be my mom for real?" he asked. "For real," Lillian whispered, kissing the top of his head. Oliver took her hand, weaving his fingers through hers. No contracts, no acts, just truth. And in that fragile, ordinary moment, the family they had all secretly imagined finally became real.